One of the questions that sometimes arises is the relationship between science and the Bible. Do they contradict one another? And the theory of evolution is one of those things that is brought up as contradictory to the Bible, because after all, if there was one man and one woman created, as we find in the book of Genesis, and yet the theory of evolution says that we probably are ancestors of hominids like the apes, and then evolved from them. Is that contradictory? Again, we have to recognize that the Bible is speaking the truth as revealed by God through various stories and myths and through letters and through various types of literature, that God works through the human genius of people and conveys truth through that human genius. But we can recognize that our science today has developed in such a way that we know something more than the writers did at the time that they wrote the creation story. And in fact, if we were to look at the creation story, it views the world in a much different way than we would recognize the world today. And that's been scientifically proven. So for instance, in the book of Genesis, it seems that the world really is flat. Well, we know that it's not. And it seems like there's heavens that in the book of Genesis that cover the earth, kind of like a dome. And we know that that's not the case either. So science has arrived at certain understandings that seem to be different from the Bible. So how do we reconcile those? Well, first of all, we can recognize that science itself is a different medium than the scriptures. It's almost like a scientist would describe a sunset in a particular way. They would describe it in terms of the fact of the sunset, whereas a poet would look at it in a different way, would describe it through poetry, in terms of its colors and in terms of the effect that it has on our senses and our feelings and so on. So there are different mediums of describing a particular event. If evolution, which is a theory still, it seems to be the best theory for describing how things move from one type of species to another, but it is not scientifically factual as of yet. It's still a theory. But let's say that they prove that as an absolute theory. Does it contradict the Bible? No, because the truth of the Bible is that God creates. So ultimately, the way that God creates is through evolution. And the truth of the Bible is that God has created human beings. And so still, there is the recognition of the creation of human beings through God, but through a whole process. Is that creation good? Yes, it is good because God has created all that is good. How does evil enter into the world? Well, the scriptures indicate that it happens through the sin of the first people, represented by Adam, the man, and Eve, the woman. And so it's not contradictory, it's just looking at the beginnings of things in different ways. The truth of the scripture still comes through in that God creates, and what God has created is good. There is not a scientific contradiction to that then in the end.